So we did a Comic-Con podcast where we talked to our friends Michaela and Emily about all things Comic-Con, and I started talking about The Killing Joke with Taylor, and it went so long that we decided to pull it out and have just a Killing Joke podcast. So this is that podcast that you're about to hear, which is just us talking about The Killing Joke.
So I guess to jump in, first and foremost, and because you were there was a Killing Joke panel. And for those of you at home who are like, Killing Joke, the graphic novel that came out 25-ish years ago is finally being adapted into a animated series, much like they did The Dark Knight Returns, which that was a two-part little mini two-part animated series that was really, really, really good. I think a lot of people universally are just like, no man, if it was going to happen, that they nailed it. So I think there was a lot of the same kind of fervor or anticipation for The Killing Joke, even though it's not.
So.
It's a lot of people, it's not their favorite story in the way that Dark Knight Returns is, but it has Kevin Conroy and Mark Hamill coming back as Batman and Joker respectively. So that was exciting. And it's just, it's one of those books where they had the ability to, because it was shorter, they could pad it out a little bit more for a 90-minute movie. They could do a little bit more and kind of delve into that. So I for one was excited and was actually kind of looking forward to this. However, and you were there, so I went on IO9, and like all of a sudden everybody's like, holy the fuck, what it all just went off the rails apparently. Well, and yeah. I'll say this, it started before the con. Somebody had posted on Twitter, I don't know how this leaked or how this got out, but there was a video, a clip of Barbara Gordon.
Spoil it. Don't spoil exactly what happened.
Don't say what happens? All right. Well, there was a clip of Barbara Gordon as Batgirl interacting with Batman. Let's just put it that way. And it was not something you would ever expect to happen. And it left me feeling kind of like, huh. And if you know anything about the Killing Joke story, really, really, really confusing as far as why they would think that was an appropriate choice. So that had come out.
Honestly, that is the question that comes up every 10 minutes in the movie. Is why did you think that was the appropriate choice right there?
Should we say what it is in that clip? I mean, it's public. If you want to go see what it is.
Well, I think there's just the only reason I was saying don't spoil it is because there's such an interesting build up to this. So it wasn't like a shit show on the floor as soon as the panel started.
Okay, give us,
and even to back up a second from that, because what we talked to my friend Michaela about was her experience in Hall H. So for a couple of years, my friends and I have gone to these later night showings. We saw Batman Year One a few years ago, and they're in Ballroom 20, which is the second biggest hall in the convention center. It seats something like 4,200. Hall H is 6,000.
Wow.
So it's a really big deal, and there's definitely a timing to this. So there was this thing before this started, The Killing Joke, famous graphic novel written by Alan Moore, illustrated by Brian, oh my God.
Boland?
Yeah. And so there was a big deal because there's some very graphic, the story is graphic. Barbara Gordon, Batgirl, is shot by the Joker, paralyzing her, which DC decided to turn into continuity, into canon, and put it in the continuity of the story. And at least what I've read is that Alan Moore kind of feels bad about this story now. Like he thinks it's
really?
I did read that comment in some of the aftermath of this. Like, I don't know that he's totally disavowed it, but like you, I was sort of anticipating it because I thought it had been a long time since I read The Killing Joke. It was not fresh in my mind on how graphic it is because he also sexually assaults her.
Yeah,
And
let's keep this in mind.
The book, I don't really remember if it's just that he takes photos of her in order to disturb her father later.
That is definitely the case.
Actually sexually assaults her.
I think it's implied. He definitely takes the photos, and let's kind of back up to this. The crux of the story is the Joker is trying to prove to Batman that one bad day can ruin a man. So while he's pursuing this sort of bad day, giving Jim Gordon just the worst day ever to see, he's trying to break Jim Gordon.
Right.
This is juxtaposed with sort of the history of the Joker, where the guy who is the, how did that guy become the Joker? And
Yeah.
for him, it was just one bad day that just all came together, juxtaposed with this. But the big twist that Grant Morrison sort of shed a big light on a couple years ago was at the very end of the book. And spoilers, if you haven't read the book, please go check it out, or maybe check it out with this in mind, because it's not entirely clear. But Batman kills the Joker. Like, he's holding the Joker's neck, and they're laughing, and there's this the laughing just suddenly stops, and the rain keeps falling, and the cops are showing up, and it's like, once Grant Morrison said that, he's like, that's the only way you can take it, but they left it ambiguous so that it doesn't have to be. And I'm just like, oh my God, it was brilliant. It's a really, and you think about it in the course of the story, the Joker's trying to prove one bad day can break a man, and instead of breaking Jim Gordon, he breaks Batman. Batman does what he's never meant, what he's never going to do. And so you're like, holy shit. So all of this I would love to have seen explored in nuanced ways. And I mean, I thought an animated series would have been appropriate.
None of that. You don't get any of that. So
oh God.
Really? So maybe I'll cover the Ballroom 20 experience some other time.
I'm confused. No, wait though. I'm confused. You actually saw it?
Oh yeah, so this was.
Oh my God, I didn't know
this
that.
was the world premiere of The Killing Joke.
Oh, I thought there was just a panel you went to. I didn't. Oh my goodness. Okay, so
the way they did it was they had because it was R-rated. They ran this one a little bit later than they normally do. The start time was 9, but they only started the panel then. So they ran the panel for about 50 minutes or so. Mm-hmm. And then they were going to show. Then they showed the movie, and then they said some of the panelists will come back out after the movie for a Q&A. So on the panel was the director. I believe his name is Sam Liu, but he literally said like 2 sentences the entire time. Brian Azzarello, who wrote it. God.
And he's the focus of a lot of the sort of shenanigans that
as he should be. Yeah, Bruce Timm, who's the animation supervisor, and he's also an artist for DC, but he's kind of the guy that they all credit with spearheading the revival in DC animated series and stuff like that. And then the cast: Ray Wise and Tara Strong and Kevin Conroy and the moderator, whose name I forget. But to kick it off, the moderator gets a phone call and is like, "Oh, sorry, my phone's ringing," and he holds the phone up to the mic. And it's Hamill himself.
Mark Hamill?
Yeah, Mark Hamill in the Joker's voice going like, "I'm here."
Nice. And of course, he was off filming Star Wars, so he couldn't be
there. Yeah, it was great too. They had this good line during the panel of how usually they have recorded all of the animated series and even the other movies all in the same room, like the voice actors acting them out on a soundstage. And how great it's been to interact with everyone. That's a big thing that Warner has done, to make this comfortable for them. Yeah, and Hamill couldn't do it for The Killing Joke because he was on the Star Wars set, and the moderator points out, like, I find it interesting that he couldn't do his voice acting with you because he was in a movie where he literally said nothing at all. So the problem I would say, like, I can't say that my suspicions went up necessarily during the panel, but it was laid on so thick about how emotional and heavy and wonderful this movie is that, like, literally every person was like, "Oh my God, I just can't wait for you to see it. It's just so good." I mean, just the just stuff we got from everybody, and it's just so emotional, and the story is so great. And they just kept, like, one after the other, kept laying it on. To the point where my friends and I were like, kind of bumping each other in the side and going, "Jesus Christ, just show the movie already!" Like, you don't need to tell us how good the movie is if we're about to watch the movie.
Yeah, let it speak for itself.
Yeah, and like you said, the graphic novel is pretty short, so they had always talked about how they're going to pad it out. And in this panel, and this is where I think the trouble starts, is Azzarello and Tim both say, "Well, we knew, Barbara Gordon really doesn't have an arc in the graphic novel, and so we wanted to give her a character arc. So that's what we did." And the TLDR of that is, no, she still doesn't have an arc. They tacked on a Batgirl story at the beginning, and then the Killing Joke happens, and that's it. and then there's an after credit sequence where she in a wheelchair rolls up like into a secret computer lab, and she is, becoming Oracle. But as I've seen already commented online, like this doesn't, setting her up as Oracle in this 10-second scene or less doesn't make the bad choices of The Killing Joke worth it.
Well, can we jump into? I mean, can we say exactly I mean, spoilers,
sure.
spoilers. If you don't want to know, stop listening. Go watch.
Yeah, we're gonna spoil everything. I've already spoiled things. I guess,
but I mean,
saying she becomes Oracle, but
you've spoiled stuff that's in the books. I mean, but in this is something brand new that hasn't really been explored at all in the DC universe.
Well, there's a couple things online where Bruce Timm, I guess, wrote this into a Batman Beyond story. So not that it was canon in that aspect.
First, though. Let's say what it is. So what happens, and what's present in this clip that got shared before the con is Barbara Gordon makes out with Batman and then has sex with him.
Yeah, Batgirl has sex with Batman.
And you're supposed to believe that she's that mentor, and like she's supposed to be the same age as Robin in a lot of the canon.
She's a little older than Robin, because there's definitely like, I mean, I'm just not the devil's advocate this too much, but she's definitely sort of the in-betweener. Like, Robin's the little kid that has a crush on her, and she's always like pushing him away, like, come on, kid.
Okay.
But
okay.
Later on in the comics, when he grows up and he's Nightwing, I mean, there's definitely a thing between them. In fact, I'm pretty sure in the last run of Batgirl that they sort of acknowledged that they previously had a relationship.
Well, that makes sense. That's perfect, because then it's like, oh, here's this kid who, like kind of like Anakin Skywalker, who had this crush on this girl and grew up to a strapping young man, and they went off, and they had a little thing. For Batman, it's like the creepy college or high school professor had, getting it on with a student. It's like, what is this? Like, this is.
But literally everything else leading up to that is so. I mean, it's not like I sat there going, this is dumb. I really sat there going, I don't know what's going on. Because I had heard some stuff about how they wanted to take the art really seriously and they really wanted to capture the spirit of the comic book. In my eyes, no. It looks exactly like every other Batman animated thing, which is, in my mind, childish.
Yeah.
It looks almost like a kid's cartoon. Not totally a kid's cartoon, but to have that with the R rating.
Yeah.
And the content did not work for me. I mean, it should have been grittier. It should have been more adult. It should have like given the signal of the art should have been that this is grown up important material. But Batgirl looks like, I mean, I know we're talking about cartoons here, but if Batman looks like he's in his 30s or 40s in a cartoon, she looks like she's 15.
Oh god.
I mean, it's like a tiny little girl. And in fact, that clip that leaked on YouTube, which is still up there, I found it yesterday. You can see it starts out with her fighting him, and just the way they've drawn their bodies. I mean, she is this diminutive little girl, and he is this giant, broad-shouldered man.
So strange. So did you?
But it's even leading up. Like, so the story, the arc that they gave her is this other bad guy, this sort of son of a gangster who wants to take over his father's gang, who is, I am not even kidding you, named Paris Franz.
Oh my god.
So it's like it starts out being corny, like a children's cartoon. And there's some explanation, and even like Batgirl, when Batman tells her that, Batgirl goes, "You're kidding, right?" But in my brain I'm going like, "No, you're kidding, right?" Like like isn't that what I'm supposed to be asking Brian Azzarello? Like,
it's like Rocky Horror Picture Show, like the audience starts participating and yelling at the screen,
right, like that's ridiculous.
Props and stuff.
There's, I don't know that I can say there was a groan at that point, but when Batgirl actually, is in this fight with Batman, I mean, he's literally just told her off, like, you need to stop investigating this case. You haven't been pushed to the edge yet. You don't, this guy he's dangerous. You don't know what you're getting into, etc. Batman's just put her down and put her in her place as his student, as his, as his manatee, as Tracy Jordan calls those he mentors. And he has dismissed her in the harshest possible terms.
Yeah.
And she starts a fight with him, which he initially is like dodging her punches and not letting her land one, and he's not returning. And then she gets a couple in, by surprise, and flips him. a little judo flip, and then she's on top of him, and she just starts kissing him. He grabs her ass. She pulls her top off, and it's like fade to black, and you're going. I mean, the audience reaction was not, oh, like it was laughter. This is like
Oh wow.
4,200 people laughing in surprise that this
Wow.
stupid thing was happening on the screens in front of us. You
Wow.
know, this was not. It was not there. Nothing that came before that made anyone think this was the right moment for that to happen. It was so cliched in that way of like, if you think of an action movie where two characters, the two action people are fighting each other, and then it turns kind of romantic or something. I mean, you
Yeah,
can
yeah,
you
yeah.
can easily see, like, I just watched Ant-Man again, that scene where Evangeline Lilly and Paul Rudd are like, she's teaching him and she kind of does a flip on him. You can see in like it's so hackneyed now that they didn't do it in Ant-Man, but 10 years ago they would have done it where she would have flipped him and they would have ended up kissing or something, and
Well, and
that's what happened.
hackneyed
So
as it is, they are the same age, so it
right, right.
makes.
There's no weird, and I mean, I guess you're supposed to go, oh well, it's Batgirl being a powerful agent of her own, destiny or whatever. But what does she do afterwards? She goes and sobs to, I'm not kidding, her stereotypical gay friend at the library. Like, it
Whoa.
is the
Wow.
worst stereotype of a gay friend.
Holy
This guy that's
shit.
like, just with a fey accent, and
Oh
come on, sister,
no.
you're preaching to the choir or whatever. Uh,
Whoa.
she's been commiserating with him about her older male friend, and so throughout the prelude, you're thinking, well, he's interpreting this as a sexual relationship, and she's really just telling him about her mentor relationship.
That would be
So
okay. And see, and I would
right, so
forgive that if that was
it
really the
almost was like
case.
a joke at that point. I
Yeah.
almost forgave the sort of um, stereotype of him, because I thought the joke was, well, they're overplaying this character because he's misinterpreting the relationship. But then that
Yeah.
happens, and it turns into like, what is this, like a terrible rejected Will and Grace script or something? I
Oh
don't know
god.
what's going on. So there was the laughter at Batgirl having sex with Batman, which was,
Okay.
I felt like this is where the audience, I hoped, was sort of like, well, basically at that moment I was no longer on their side,
Yeah.
and not that it was exploitative in that moment, but it
Yeah.
just showed that, like, the art, first of all, was the big problem to me, was that if it
Can I
looks
ask
like a
you
child's
Well,
cartoon,
can I
you
ask you
can't.
real quick though? Did you appreciate the art in Dark Knight Returns Part One and Two?
I didn't see them.
Oh,
But
you really
this
should.
this was the style of Batman Year One, which has
Mm.
been the style all along.
Yeah.
And my friends afterwards, when I talked to it, and talked to them about it, and said, I don't get the hype about the art. They said it was more about the framing of it. That there were
Mm.
there were certain shots that were focused on the Joker's face, for example, that were like basically framed right out of the graphic novel.
Okay.
But to me, that didn't really make a difference because it still looked like a kid's cartoon. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, a little bit smarter, but not gritty and
Yeah.
dark. And like I said, Batgirl looked like she was like 15, and so there was the there's the gay friend problem, this horrible stereotype, and then
Ugh.
this Batgirl sort of. I don't know what the trope is. It's not a damsel in distress, but she was a pining, lovelorn, sort of little girl kind of thing.
That
Like, it
just
really diminished her
imagine
role.
imagine if she was a smart, competent, like early 20s, like she's Batman's prized pupil,
And
and
if
like
she were almost acting like his equal.
yeah,
I mean, it wasn't like when he talks down to her and says, "No, get out of this." It's not like there's been this whole prelude about, she's told us, I've been working with him for 3 years at this point, and blah blah blah. So, whether that gives her enough experience to, like, to say, "Hey, stop," trying to pigeonhole me and stop trying to protect me. I'm
yeah,
Batgirl. But there was never a moment where she stood up to Batman. She just got so worked up that she lashed out at him in this fight, and then ends up having sex
oh
with him. It just
my
did not.
god,
And I cannot stress enough, this wouldn't have even been as problematic if I hadn't listened to 45 minutes of these guys telling me how awesome this movie was and how they'd given Batgirl a story where Alan Moore hadn't. And like been the criticism for decades that Alan Moore wrote The Killing Joke. It's a Batman story, and Batgirl is an object in it. You know, she is not a person with agency in that story.
Yeah.
And so for the creators of this to try to rectify that by giving her this, this lovelorn.
It's almost like they doubled down on that motif. They're like, she's
and then obviously what went wrong after the showing was they got called out on that, and Azzarello tripled down on it and called.
Well, let's wait.
Yeah, we'll get to that. I'm sorry.
The movie ends, and
to take you through the rest of the movie, at that point, so then it almost like does like the one more notable moment. There's a scene where Batgirl is like on top of a building and she decides to check in with Batman. She hasn't heard from him since they had sex, and she's told her gay friend about this. So she like literally hits the communicator and she's like, what's going on tonight? And he curtly answers her like, I think I found Paris France in whatever district. And she and then he tells her, and then she's like, listen, I don't know why you're not talking to me. It was just sex, Batman. And he basically gives her this response. I don't remember exactly what it is, like literally, but it was along the lines of, yeah, I'll call you later. And he just hangs up on her. And there was at that moment, behind me, a very bro-sounding crowd of like, yeah, like Batman, you tell her.
Oh my god!
Like almost cheering it, and it was so comical that they would do that, not in a haha way,
yeah.
But my friend sitting next to me like made fun of that thing that happened behind us. He was like, yeah, bro, you tell her, in this very jokey way, because we really were like, wait, are you guys joking like we're joking, or are you serious that you think it's cool?
Yeah.
Like, are you on the side? Did this turn into like like you're cheering for Batman for for ghosting Batgirl at this point or whatever? It was so stupid.
Wow.
And so then at that point, she meets up with, Batman at that point has refused her help, and then he gets into a spot where he needs it. And so she turns up as sort of the white knight, where he's told her to stay away. He's got him down at the docks. And they end up having like a rocket launcher and a sneak attack on him, and he gets severely injured and has to eject from the Batmobile, and he gets shot and he's bleeding, and she shows up and attacks Paris France and just beats the shit out of Paris France, and there's like...
I just can't take seriously the term beat the shit out of Paris France.
I know. It's so dumb. And
I mean, that's the kind of villain that you'd see in Batman 66, where it's like, you just can't get rid of a bomb. It's like that's and Paris France is like this mustache twirling villain. Literally, he's like, I'll get you next time, Batman. And he like gets in his like hot air balloon and like rockets off.
I wish he'd had a hot air balloon. I don't know if that would have improved it or made it even worse if they were that tone deaf. And to top it all off, like in her first encounter with him, there's a scene that almost gets a little like he's kind of flirting with her. He's like, Batgirl, I didn't know you're so hot, like as they're in this fight. And then he grabs her from behind. He's got her like pinned in this sort of headlock thing, where this vice where he's got her arm and her neck pinned up.
And she has sex with him too, right then.
No.
Oh.
But it gets to where you're like, you didn't really know, like, they're doing the quips back and forth, the sort of flirty quips, and he says something like, you underestimate me or whatever, and he gasses her, and he says, you've got about 10 seconds, and it's like, it really, at that moment, I went, you were kidding me. She's not going to be sexually assaulted twice in this movie. Wow. And that was in like the first 5 minutes, and she gets away from him that time.
Okay.
And that's when, and then Batman shows up to sort of rescue.
I got really scared for a second. You were going to say, and she did. I'm like,
no, I mean, but this was before she's even had sex with Batman. So then on top of that, for her a few minutes later in the script to have sex with Batman, it felt like this is, I don't know. It just all felt gross to me.
Okay. Well,
It felt very tone deaf or whatever. Of like, what story are you telling here?
there were a lot of people like you in the audience, and a lot of journalists, and a lot of
Yeah.
people who were seeing this for the first time. It was the premiere.
Yeah,
So it
world
was
premiere.
fans and writers and media people in general. And the movie concludes. Was there an applause? Was there just an uncomfortable silence? What was the reaction?
There was definitely applause during the Oracle scene.
Uh,
So the credits hit, and a huge group of people get up, and I saw people leaving during the movie too, which
okay.
is kind of shocking to think. You stood in line, you waited through that panel. It's 10:30, 11 o'clock at night, and now you're deciding to leave.
Well,
And
considering what you
it's
saw.
only like a 75-minute movie. It's not even 90 minutes. So these people who are leaving 30 minutes into it, I mean, it was all after the sex scene, so I assume they
Yeah.
were just like, "This is fucking
Whatever,
stupid."
man. They didn't want to see
And
everyone. So
but,
the movie
who
ends,
knows?
and then
So
there's that, and then they
yeah, so
do
like as
this.
soon as the credits roll, tons of people stand up to leave. Then and the lights even came on, and then the Oracle scene rolls like right after a quick credits.
Okay.
So that was like after that, after it faded after that, I left. So I didn't see the Q&A that happened afterwards.
Well, what had happened, and this is all via what I read on IO9.
On IO9, yeah, they had a really good report on it that everybody's.
Yeah. Apparently, then they had a Q&A, which was not part of the. I mean, there was the panel before, which is one thing.
And they had announced the Q&A before the movie started.
Okay, so that was going to happen regardless. So I'm sure after the movie ended, everybody was raring to go. But I mean, I'm sure a lot of questions got asked and answered that didn't get reported on. But the big kind of the confrontation that everybody's going to, and it's not just IO9. Bleeding Cool's got a good little sort of write up on it.
Okay.
Yes, I
was
always
a Bleeding Cool. So there was a person, a Joker cosplayer, who asked a question, and then there was a reporter who shouted something after the question was asked.
So the court, and this is just again according to IO9. This is Brand. Oh, so Bruce Timm explained.
It was the Bleeding Cool reporter who shouted.
Bruce Timm started explaining what it was, why they were expanding her character, blah blah blah. And then let's see here, where I'm looking at the thing now. And then here we go. So it was during a Q&A that things got dicey. A Joker cosplayer asked the writers why they would downplay Barbara Gordon in the way they did. And according to Bleeding Cool reporter Jeremy Conrad, the writers insisted she was still a strong female character. And then Conrad himself, who'd seen the film and was in the audience with you, shouts out, "Yeah, by using sex and then pining for Bruce." And then Brian Azzarello, who was on stage, says, "Want to say that again, pussy?" And
right.
And then it kind of devolved. And then Azzarello gets on this rant. And Bruce Timm was trying to be more like, political about like, hey, it's complicated, and then Azzarello was getting into it with everybody. And it's like they're trying to explain or rationalize, Batman's overreactions or underreactions and all this kind of stuff. And let's keep in mind, Azzarello has a reputation for being, a little bit outspoken or a little bit, he likes to troll and push buttons here and there. But it wasn't, after legitimate concern for them to basically double down on, well, no, that's, this was correct.
It's the Killing Joke is like the third rail of comics to adapt. I mean, even more so than like Watchmen or something. It's like we touched on. I don't know that Moore disavowed it, but I know or at least I've read that he said later he was not totally comfortable or he made mistakes in his portrayal of Batgirl, and yeah, she's just an object for a Batman story. She's not an agent at all in the Killing Joke. Batgirl is not. Yeah. So for them to say we're going to add some stuff that's going to correct that mistake. And then, again, I just cannot stress enough for them to spend 45 goddamn minutes telling us how incredible this movie that we're going to see, which is 75 minutes, is going to be like, and how they've kind of, nobody wanted to say they corrected it, but they wanted to say we made it better. Plus all the all the hype about this that's gone on. I mean, when I went back and looked it up, after I saw it, I found this article from the Mary Sue like months and months ago, maybe even last year, where when it was announced that they were going to add to the Batgirl story arc, the writers were sort of cautiously optimistic, like let's hope they kind of fill this character out, and she doesn't. After the Paris Franz story, she's at her dad's place. She answers the door. Joker shoots her, kidnaps her dad, sexually assaults her, and that's it. We don't see Barbara Gordon. Like, we see her in the hospital, like for the scenes in the hospital, but it's not like there's any agency there at all. There's no arc. So this idea that they're like, when they're telling us that, they're like, we gave her an arc. I'm going, do you know what an arc is? It's not like there was a story at the beginning, and then there was a different story, and then there was a little ending tacked on, but there's no arc. This character didn't like grow of her own accord or anything like that. I mean, they have some clever lines about getting taken to the edge, and so you realize, like, oh well, Batman was taken to the edge because he watched his parents murdered in front of him, and then she's taken to the edge because she almost murders Paris Franz, but like then this awful thing happens to her. She doesn't get to be the agent of her own revenge or anything, and then on top of that, Batman pretty definitively does not kill the Joker in the movie.
Oh, really? So they actually leave that.
And on top of that, Bruce Timm and Brian Azzarello tell this stupid story in the panel on how they had this big meeting after some Comic-Con where all the people like talked about, like, well, how do you think it ends? What happens after that last panel? And they go around, we don't know how to end this film, and we got to figure out a way to end this film. We can't leave it in the same way. And then months later,
yes, they could. They totally should have done that.
Months later, Azzarello pulls Bruce Timm aside at some conventions, like, I got to talk to you outside where it's quiet. I know how this thing's going to end. And he tells him, and Bruce Timm goes, yep, that's it. And all they do is just laugh, like Batman and the Joker. Joker tells this terrible joke, and Batman starts laughing with him. And that's how it's like, guys, you have totally missed. I just don't know how to describe it.
That just sounds like a tone deafness. Like even Brian Bolland in like the when they so they a couple years ago or however long they redid the Killing Joke, they basically recolored it, and and there's a lot of controversy about that. I for one love the new colorization. I understand why people love the original, but I think the newer one fits in the Batman world better. It's grittier and darker and just kind of has that. So I take to it a lot more. But both exist, and you can enjoy either or neither. But in that version, Brian Bolland actually, acknowledges the fact that the ending was intentionally left open-ended, and hints with a pretty big wink that, hey, you're supposed to take away from this that Batman probably killed the Joker. And Grant Morrison, once Grant Morrison lays out his reasoning, you're like, well, of course that's what it is. And why else would Batman start laughing if not to? And you even tie it to the beginning. He goes in to the prison and talks, who he thinks is a Joker. It turns out to not be. But he sits down across from Joker going, I at least had to try. I had to try to talk to you once because one of us is going to kill the other. And he says it right there. He's like, this is going to end, and one of us is going to kill the other, and that there won't be any coming back from it. And like he lays it out there. They foreshadow it very explicitly. So then at the very end, when he starts laughing, you take that as it's horrifying because you're like, oh my God, Batman. It's like a person who's just like lost, who's just lost it. They're like, I can't.
He's gone over the edge.
And I'm just gonna sit here and laugh and give in and.
Which is just such a dumb story for them to tell in the movie. Like, if your point is you haven't been to the edge, you don't know what's like if you fall over it, et cetera, like, and then neither one of them really does.
Yeah.
I mean, it's maybe it's expected or something for him to kill the Joker, but I don't. Plus, when you think of all the other just sort of technical problems, like getting Mark Hamill back into it and stuff like that, why not kill him? Why not say that's the end of him and feel like there's some resolution to it, rather than leaving it with that stupid cutaway, which was not like a Sopranos kind of ambiguity. It didn't just like go black on them laughing. It's like the camera literally just pans down to their feet as they're both laughing, and the puddle of rain or whatever. There's no, it doesn't like it doesn't like turn into a black screen to leave you wondering.
But does the
happened.
Joker? But see, in the book, that same thing happens, but then the laughing stops, and you see the puddle.
No, they're just laughing,
and you hear the
both of them are
sirens
laughing
coming.
together.
It's haunting because you're like, shit, the laughing stopped, and all that's missing is like a crick or something that shows that he snapped his neck. But his hands are reaching out towards his neck. Like, what else are you supposed to?
There are no hands reaching towards the Joker's neck. That was almost like, and having not read it in a long time and not remembering it. Plus, so if we just talk, and then going back to the weakness of the Killing Joke story, like I said, it's been a long time since I read it. It's not fresh in my mind. I honestly kind of didn't remember the Joker backstory, the one bad day part of it.
Okay.
So I don't know how much they elaborated there, because I know in the panel they talked about how amazing it was that Mark Hamill, had this different voice for the flashback Joker than for present day. But to me, as a Batman fan, that whole story, like I said, I don't remember how much of it is in the original movie or the original book.
There's a lot of it. It gets pretty detailed about all the how his wife leaves him and all these other things.
Well, now does Batman cause his turn into the Joker?
Yes.
So the Joker is pulled into this robbery by some other, because he's desperate for money because his wife is pregnant. The night before the robbery is to take place, or actually the night of the robbery, he finds out that his wife is and she is pregnant with his child, that they've been killed in some tragic accident, like a car wreck or something. So all that happens in the book and the movie. What I assume was added for the movie, because I don't think this was in the book, is that they make him put on the costume of the Red Hood.
That's in the book.
Oh, it is? Really?
Yep.
I don't remember that at all.
Yep.
So, yeah. So anyway, and then they're in this chemical factory to rob it or whatever. It's like the lamest ploy ever. And the security guards are there, and Joker's like, "Oh, they weren't here the last time I was here." They shoot the co-conspirators or arrest them or chase them off or whatever. Batman shows up. Joker trips over the cape, falls into the chemical stuff, turns into the Joker.
Yep.
Okay. So to me, the story of the Joker is not that, like, to me, the terrifying element of the Joker is not that he had a bad day and turned into the Joker. Like, psychopaths are born; they are not made.
Interesting.
Like that's a literal, like a diagnosis of psychopathy, and so one of them's running for president right now, and they're not. That is a thing from birth. That is just a thing. 4% of the population are psychopaths, and that is what makes it so terrifying. Is that Batman keeps thinking he can apply normal rules, and I'm talking about the scope, the arc of Batman, like sort of the global history of Batman. What makes that the Batman story in general interesting is that he thinks he can overcome this with sort of goodness and justice, and he can't, because it is sort of inborn in the Joker. To me, that's the whole conflict, is that Batman is stuck in this like existential problem of he's Sisyphus, constantly putting the Joker back in the asylum, thinking he can be reformed or locked up. I love that
analogy. Oh, it's so good.
But he can't. It's such a to me, the way that Batman frees himself from that is by actually killing the psychopath and realizing
why weren't you writing this? This is this is so good. Like I want you. I would have gone to the panel to hear you be like, and this is how we approach it. I'd be like, yes. Yes, this is
fuck
amazing.
Alan Moore's story. Let me tell you what it should have been, because to me is the really interesting psychology of Batman. Is that Batman has this arbitrary rule about. It's not an arbitrary rule about killing, except that he applies it to a person to whom it can't be applied.
Wow.
And to me, you can read The Killing Joke as well as see like the movie The Dark Knight, and how you and I've talked about this before, how Heath Ledger's Joker tells several different stories about how he got the scars on his face. And you can read The Killing Joke and see it as the Joker's telling you his backstory, and he's full of shit.
Yeah.
And trying to tell Commissioner Gordon, I had one bad day and this is what it did to me, and he could be bullshitting him.
Yeah.
But in the movie, just the way it looked and the voice acting and having that other dimension to it, it's like the way you absorb it is, no, this is the history of the Joker.
This is canon. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's that, just was what all of those elements
Mm.
bothered me so much that
It sounded like they took a really the Killing Joke was always an Elseworlds book. It was always kind of like a one shot, especially if you consider that he killed the Joker. It's it can only ever be the last Batman Joker story, and that probably I always hear the arguments they never should have turned the Watchmen into a movie. Just it was only ever meant to be a graphic novel. I disagree, but that's a whole other debate unto itself. But it feels like this is even more so. This should just not have been turned into this medium. It should have just been left as it was, as something that just exists in the late 80s that we can always go back to, but it doesn't need to be a movie in the same way that The Dark Knight Returns was actually better in an animated movie form than it was on the page, I will say. And you can crucify me if you'd like, but that's you watch that Dark Knight Returns movie, it's great. It is great. There's a lot of stuff that you don't, it's packed with so much more that you don't get on the page that I was just like,
Well, and I can't qualify this enough. I've already said that, but my experience was related specifically to the anticipation of seeing this movie, feeling like it's going to be a big event, and then hearing that panel stuff. I think Tara Strong, the voice actress of Harley Quinn and Batgirl in this movie, Harley Quinn's not in it, but she does that in the animated series. Mm-hmm. She said like, oh, my favorite Batman stories are the dark ones. So even just hearing these things before you go into the movie, I'm thinking like, yeah, it's going to be grittier, it's going to be darker, it's going to tell a different story. And then when when the first panel comes up and it looks like Batman the Animated Series, I'm going, this does not connect to me. So and then I think I've sort of presented the whole my whole experience of it. I'm sure it's possible to watch that in a different context and have a different takeaway, but to me it was just it was just not. I mean, I want to say it was a miss, like as a swing and a miss, but that does not seem strong enough condemnation of it. It was just a really tone deaf, and and especially in this age of where we've seen rape stories be horribly told in Game of Thrones and just other places. It's like, guys, be aware of how these stories are being told in our culture, and tell them. You've got to tell them in a different way than they were told in 1988.
Yeah, true.
And not that justifies the way it was told then, but I mean, it's definitely an artifact of its time.
Well, and if you're gonna translate it into a new medium, bring something to it that, and they'll argue, well, we did, and it's like, yeah, but bring something to it that expands it into a new context that you wouldn't have ever gotten from the graphic novel. To say, oh, she's, it seems like everything they did to Barbara only just doubled down on the fact that she's always just somebody who's being used. She's just used as, throughout the whole story, she's just used. And it's like, well, that doesn't do anything new. Like, why adapt it if you're not going to give it a new life or a new form, or do something to it that gives. I mean, again, I go back to Dark Knight Returns, like that in the animated series. Like it had there was more they could add. There's more scenes. There's more dialogue. There was more between the Batman Carrie Kelly relationship that worked really well, and you got to see. It was more clear that the whole thing was like this giant opera where. Batman's, as he goes, his who he fights escalates until ends up fighting God himself, essentially in Superman. He starts off with Two-Face, and then he ends up fighting like the gods themselves and conquers death. It's like it becomes this giant operatic thing, and that was more apparent to me watching it than reading it.
Like I said, I think The Killing Joke is the third rail of Batman stories. They never should have made it in the first place, so I don't even want to pick it apart, like how they could have done it better or something.
No, you nailed it.
Never should have been adapted. I think that's just the way. That's the way.
That's the way it is.
That's the way to state my opinion. I follow
Some things will never change. Stories of rain.
Oh my lord. You're going into the next refrain. Let's bring it on.
It's dangerous too, because then I'm going to start to make the. Never mind.
We've been doing this podcast for a long
Well,
time.
here's what I'm going to
So,
suggest. I'm going to suggest we take this bit and make it because
a separate thing.
Killing Joke comes out this week, I believe. So we could almost just make this a Killing Joke specifically, just episode.
So I follow this YA novelist named Gwenda Bond, whom you should totally follow. She has written several YA novels about Lois Lane as a teenager in high school, where Lois Lane is basically learning her tenacious reporter chops as kind of a teenage detective. So it has this great like Veronica Mars kind of spin on Lois Lane. So you should definitely read those. But she tweeted out this week when she was reading the press about Killing Joke, maybe when this comes out, we should talk about our favorite Batgirl stories loudly so that people can read really cool Batgirl stories. So I thought I would drop a couple on you, which are Batgirl Year One, which maybe is technically a trade paperback and not a graphic novel, is awesome. It is such a good telling of Batgirl where Robin is a very young Robin and helping her out sort of secretly. And it is so fun, and the art is so beautiful, and it's just such a great story. Like I definitely say, grab Batgirl Year One and read a fun, lighthearted Batgirl story.
Yeah.
I loved the Batgirl of Burnside run that Cameron.
I remember that. Yeah, you've talked about that favorably before.
Babs Tarr. I love Babs Tarr's art, and so those first two volumes that are now trades, go get them. Like they're so good. I think the first one was just called Batgirl of Burnside, and then I can't remember what volume 2 is. Those are really good, and they're really recent. I even liked, before the New 52 came along, there was a great run where Stephanie Brown was Batgirl, and that was the only sort of other Batgirl that I really got into. And in that one, Barbara Gordon as the Oracle was her mentor, and that was such a very cool relationship to see with a grown-up Barbara Gordon, and I just really liked that one as well. And boy, I wish I'm like racking my brain. I didn't write these down beforehand, but I think those are 3 great story arcs that you can go hunt down and really enjoy that will counteract Killing Joke.
I'm going to give you one more too that you wouldn't expect. It is, and I forget if it's year 4 or I think it's year 4, partway through year 4. Yeah, in Injustice: Gods Among Us.
Oh.
There is, she as Oracle plays a huge role, but at some point, spoilers. Another character gives her the ability to have to use her legs again.
Okay.
And she basically comes back as Batgirl after being, resigned to being Oracle for so long, and she kicks such major ass. It's like you almost hear that Wonder Woman theme kick in when she shows up. You're just like, yes. It's such a powerful moment. So
well, it's such a difficult thing too, I think, because certain characters like that, they work when they are stuck in a certain age. Stuck is maybe a little too strong, but Batgirl is a really cool. Barbara Gordon is such a really cool character, and especially when you think of like the context of the times and when she was created, that it was. You can almost see it as she's playing into patriarchal tropes of the time where she's just a mousy librarian or whatever, but she's also upsetting those and deconstructing them because, she's a mousy librarian by day, and at night she's going out and kicking ass with Batman and Robin. But that mousy librarian part leads to her being, a really smart woman when it comes to technology and science, and also a great detective, which is something that like Robin was sort of trained to be a detective, but he was naturally like an acrobat because of his parents. And Batgirl, you just felt like she already had the detective thing in her blood, because her dad's Commissioner Gordon, famous police detective, and she's a naturally, inquisitive librarian type. So she's, it's just she's such a good like role model and cool character to fit into that macho club. So I definitely, I as much as I like certain Oracle story arcs, I love that Barbara Gordon of that age when she's in her 20s, and young and and kicking ass, and I guess that's why I'm, Batgirl Burnside, I think, kind of took her back to that era a little bit. So yeah, I guess that's probably enough to talk about Batgirl. I like your idea that we do this as a standalone. So I'm Todd A, and he is Taylor Trask, and
That's right.
you can find us at toddandtaylor.com. I'm at Hey Todd A on Twitter, and you
I'm
are
at Taylor Trask on Twitter.